My name is Dr. Steven Weiner. I'm the lead author of this research study. My background includes 16 years teaching at major universities, including Iowa State and SUNY at New York. For 31 years, I worked as the director for the Institute for Relationship Communication, where I did relationship training in groups for singles, for couples, for families. I also worked with this ABC Unified School District, and I was part of the task force for youth and gang violence in Long Beach, California, as well as the task force for domestic violence in Los Angeles, California. The concept of listening is often taught in most classes in this country. Yet there are unexplored areas that have yet to be systematically theorized, tested, and applied. But the potential to revolutionize the teaching of listening as such, a team of practitioners and researchers came together to explore how passive, aggressive, and assertive listening responses affect relationship outcomes. Was the focus of my training: anger management, conflict resolution, in personal relationships. In my training, I recorded over 4,000 hours of videotapes. Looking for is which verbal and nonverbal skills would escalate or de-escalate anger. I was looking for specific statements, specific nonverbal cues such as eye contact, the voice, body movement, and spatial. When I was doing my training, I saw certain behavior that seemed passive. I saw other behavior that was aggressive. And I would videotape each person and do a split screen so I can see them interacting with each other. Assertive was something very different. I was aware of active listening, but that's primarily used in therapy and counseling. And it's the therapist to the patient. And that's not what I was dealing with. I was dealing with couples and families and singles. And what I developed was what I called assertive listening, which is more relational. Both people are interacting together. And I saw the difference between active listening and assertive listening. What I realized was that active listening uses I-you statements, such as, "My thought is you're feeling hurt." It basically does not connect the listener to the speaker. It's very appropriate in therapeutic situation. Assertive listening is very different. It uses I-you, me statements. "My thought is you're feeling hurt with me." What it does, it brings the listener to the speaker, where the speaker can react and a good chance of opening up and resolving conflict. In my training, people would share their feelings, and there would be a split screen so you could see both sender and receiver. Once we did the videotape, we'd play the videotape back, and as a group, we would look at what behaviors were seen as passive, or you would feel sorry for the person, or feel abandoned. Which behaviors were seen as aggressive, which would threaten you, and which behavior would relax you, so you'd want to listen. And what was challenging to find out what was assertive behavior, which would reduce or increase their anger. Which one would make somebody feel ignored or listened to? Which one would make somebody more vulnerable to share their feelings clearly or not? Which statement would help resolve or not resolve conflict? And which statement would make the relationship less or more satisfactory? These were our research goals. This research project was also based on information from Virginia Satir, a noted expert on listening statements. In her book, People Making, she describes 5 different types of listening responses. Each one of those listening responses were changed or modified to make them more realistic. The results of our study has the potential to revolutionize and transform our understanding and teaching of conflict resolution. It will extend initial research and focus on whether the word structure of listening response statements during conflict may intensify or mitigate anger, express or support emotions, resolve or exasperate conflict, make a person feel listened to or ignored, and improve or impair a relationship. My colleagues on this research project were Leslie Salazar. She's a professor at West Texas A&M University. Mr. Zachary Golaki. He's a doctorate student, University of Buffalo. Mr. Ben Quiteras. He's an adjunct professor, Vanguard University. We have Dr. Amy Anderson, a professor at Spokane Community College. Dr. Ian McPherson, associate professor at MacIan University. And we have Dr. William Howell, assistant professor at Texas Tech University. Let's look at conflict and anger in personal relationships. Conflict is part of any relationship, in schools, with friends, with families, and with couples. When conflict is not resolved successfully, it can spiral out of control, resulting in resentment, tension, hurting feelings, and sometimes physical violence. Often what gets in the way of resolving conflict in any relationship is the emotion of anger. Anger is a human emotion that everyone feels at one time or another. Anger can be shared in one of 3 ways: aggressively, by attacking somebody verbally and or physically; passively, by withdrawing and trying to shove the anger down. Often this leads to depression. There's a 3rd way, and a much more productive way to share anger: assertively, sharing it as information, not attacking somebody or withdrawing. Sharing anger assertively often makes the relationship healthier and stronger.
With over 24 years of experience helping patients improve their relationships, research interests, relationships, conflict resolution, communication, and trauma. Carl Rogers and Richard Farson coined the term active listening in the late 1950s. It is a method that requires that we get inside the speaker, that we grasp information from their point of view and understand what they are communicating to us. Rogers stressed that in order to be successful in active listening, the listener must be honest in their care for the speaker. Active listening requires true feelings of respect towards the individual speaking. In this process, the listener reminds themselves that they are listening because they care. In my private practice, when working with couples and using active listening, I noticed that the speaker was able to explore their feelings, feel heard, and speak about the issues at hand. When their partners engaged in active listening, I noticed that most of the time it quickly turned into the listener being the perceived source of the conflict and pain. The partner was told to share, and the listener to be fully present and unaffected by what they were hearing. More times than not, the partner became defensive and focused more on perceived blame or the fault than hearing and understanding their partner's perspective. In many cases, understand why they were reacting to what the speaker was saying. I believe this research study speaks to that missing component. To fully connect in conflict interactions, resolve conflict, and improve the relationship satisfaction when the source of the conflict or pain is the partner. In active listening, this is usually not the case with couples, as it is with the practitioner, as the practitioner is not the source of the conflict or the pain. In assertive listening, one focuses on how the listener contributes to solving conflict and improving relational satisfaction. The listening partner is just as responsible as the speaker for where this dialogue goes. As a listener using assertive listening, you quickly come to understand that how you respond can open the dialogue and bring clarity to the conflict in the relationship. In active listening, the practitioner uses I-you statements. This, more than often, does not connect the dialogue to the relationship or the speaker's feelings. With assertive listening, one is taught to respond by using an I-you-me with the verbal probability or certainty. This connects the partner and speaker and elicits an openness to resolve the conflict and improve relational satisfaction. It empowers both people. I often use assertive listening when working with couples. It is apparent to me that in the couple, they can communicate with one another and not just with me. It helps the couple play a role in the conflict that they are struggling with. My focus is helping couples identify strategies that they use and provide categories to evaluate their listening responses. These include self-awareness and styles of communication, be it passive, aggressive, or assertive. At the same time, the impact each of these has on the sender, the listener, the conflict, and the relationship itself. The goal is for the listener to use assertive listening and I-you-me with the verbal of probability or certainty. I have seen the changes in these couples using assertive listening. There is a noticeable decrease in conflict and overall relational satisfaction. The shift goes from feeling not heard, withdrawn, attacked, judged, and not wanting to share or feel listened to understood, not judged, or evaluated, leading to an openness to sharing and resolving conflict.
My name is Zachary Glowacki. I am a fifth-year Ph.D. student, now a doctoral candidate at the University at Buffalo, where I study nonverbal behavior, trust, and overall nonverbal communication. The method of our study utilized a mixed methods design, which enabled us, the researchers, to answer the research questions and test our specific hypotheses using both a combination of both quantitative and qualitative analysis. The purpose of our presentation today will focus more on the qualitative analysis. However, we did utilize a quantitative approach in answering our hypotheses and research questions. Both the literature on the importance of effective listening and our first author's practice-based coding of listening responses informed this study. As a result, the authors searched for empirical evidence of effective listening response statements to test the theorization of assertive listening. With that aim, the following hypothesis was implemented. Our first hypothesis stated that an assertive listening response will produce better relational outcomes as measured by relational harm and the desire to work with a partner in the future, compared to a passive listening response and an aggressive listening response. Continually, the authors, us, were interested in measuring how these 6 listening responses differed across multiple relational outcomes, both positive and negative. Although the authors predicted that assertive listening would produce better relational outcomes than both passive and aggressive listening, no prior research had empirically examined the differences between these 6 types of listening responses regarding perceived levels of anger, feelings of ignored, being open to sharing, resolving conflict, and improving the relationship. Thus, we proposed a series of research questions. First, are there significant differences in perceived levels of anger across the 6 listening responses? Second, are there significant differences in perceived levels of feeling ignored? Third, are there perceived differences in perceived levels of openness to sharing? Fourth, are there significant differences in perceived levels of resolving the conflict? And last, are there significant differences in perceived levels of improving the relationship across our 6 different listening responses? Overall, and in sum, by utilizing our mixed methods to analyze our data, we, the researchers, can then interpret the experiences, the events, and the variables of interest in a both systematic and a comprehensive way. The quantitative analysis, which we will not focus primarily on in this video presentation, allowed us, the researchers, to examine the relationship between our variables through both association and in using summary statistics to describe our sample. Our qualitative analysis, which we will focus more primarily in this presentation, provided an in-depth information about the participants' perceptions and a focus on the importance of their experiences. Moving next to our recruitment process, after receiving approval from the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, we began the recruitment process using a convenient sampling strategy. What this means is that we recruited students from higher education, so at college universities across the United States, including California, Texas, and New York. After students expressed interest in participating, they were then provided their consent electronically via a Qualtrics survey link. After this, they then completed the survey. As it pertains to our participants and a more detailed breakdown of our participants, initial recruitment, we had 1,038 participants that were initially recruited for the present study. After we cleaned the data and organized it and checked to see if our participants either failed or were satisfactory in approving their manipulation check, we cut our participants down to 975 participants that remained. The sample which is representative of the diversity in the geographic regions mentioned before, in terms of California, New York, and Texas. In terms of the procedures for our particular study, after participants completed the virtual informed consent form and answered the verification questions, they were then presented with a survey describing the following scenario. You and your classmate are working on a final grade group project. As the sender, you express your anger because you feel your coworker is not doing their part. Your coworker will then share 6 listening responses with you, and we want your response to each statement. Imagine that both of you appear non-threatening, are standing 3 to 5 feet away from each other, have slow body movements, are using direct eye contact, your teeth and lips are apart, with a non-threatening tone in your voice. Try not to be influenced by any nonverbal behavior of your coworker and only consider their listening statement.
Ian McPherson, Associate Professor, Communication Studies at MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And my areas of organizational communication, intercultural communication, and interpersonal communication. Along with the scenario we described to you, our participants were provided definitions related to passive, aggressive, and assertive listening to make sure that they all had common knowledge before providing their responses. And the definitions were as follows. 1, with a passive statement, you do not feel heard or understood. You withdraw and do not desire to share your feelings. In this context, the listener wants to avoid listening to how you feel and avoid the possibility of any confrontation. 2, with an aggressive statement, you feel attacked, judged. You do not want to share your feelings. In this context, the listener wants to change how you feel by judging and blaming and not taking any responsibility for this situation. Then finally, 3, an assertive statement that makes you feel listened to and understood, not judged or evaluated, and safe sharing your feelings. In this context, the listener wants to listen and share with you how they feel. So after reviewing the scenario and being provided the definitions, our participants were given following statements in the same order and asked to provide emotive responses, angry or ignored, and also share their beliefs about each statement, open to sharing, likely to resolve, or will improve relational satisfaction. Additionally, the students were asked how they would respond aggressively, assertively, or passively. And the following statements were adapted from previous scholarship. After participants had completed their responses to each statement, they were instructed to rank the statements in order from most to least preferred. Next, they were directed to provide open-ended statements about why they answered the way they did. And finally, they were asked how likely the most and least preferred statements were to resolve the problem and how likely they were to work with the other individual in the future.
My name is Leslie Ramos Salazar, and I am a professor at West Texas A&M University. My research interests include conflict management, cyberbullying, and healthcare. I'll highlight the qualitative analysis using thematic themes of participants' open-ended survey responses based on our research question. Which listening response will most likely be seen as passive, aggressive, or assertive? First, the most passive listening statement was the avoider. I think I understand why you are angry with me. Let's watch the basketball game instead, which resulted in 5 macro codes, including passive avoidance and conflict, which is an indirect passive communication such as avoiding conversations, disregarding listening to others' concerns, and dismissing conflict issues, and emotional tensions in the relationship, which intensified anger and aggression, a degradation of others, a lack of validation of feelings and thoughts, and a lack of mutual conflict resolution, all emerged as themes, which make it difficult to collaborate and work together. Sample responses from participants included, they don't want to resolve. They want the conversation to go away. This statement dismissed my feelings and did not validate my feelings. And it shows that the other person does not really have an interest in the final project. Second, the most aggressive listening statement was the advice giver. I understand why you are angry with me. You know you need my help. With 5 macro codes, when using this statement, one communicates with aggression by provoking anger, being disrespectful, competitive, hostile, and evaluative. Participants stated, this will only anger me more as I will want to believe that I do not need this person who I am angry at's help. Also, the dark personality traits of narcissism and Machiavellianism are attributed. Participants stated, they are selfish, and it sounds a little manipulating, and they are being indifferent of my feelings and the problem. They are also unwilling to listen, display ignorance of the situation, and have conflict resolution issues, which uses close conflict communication. Sample responses included, I did not feel heard and I felt pushed to the side, and our conflict is not likely to be resolved at all. Third, the most assertive listening statement, which was also rated as the most preferred in comparison to other statements, was assertive listening. I think I understand why you're angry with me. My thought is that you are angry with me by the way I've treated you, with 5 macro codes such as being assertive in communication, by being expressive and using direct and open communication and feedback, and sharing thoughts and feelings about the problem. A participant stated that it opens up the conversation rather than being defensive, and it's clear and direct that they understand why I'm angry. It also includes owning up to problematic behaviors that lead to conflict. A participant expressed, the person recognizes what they have done wrong and is taking responsibility for it. Assertive listening also includes emotional validation, acknowledges and validates others' feelings, and others feel listened to and understood. And the conflict is also understood. Participants expressed, I personally would like to be acknowledged for my feelings and know that they know why I'm upset. They also respond with social emotional skills such as being empathic, compassionate, caring, kind, respectful, and they are willing to resolve the conflict. A participant stated, the other person seems that they are willing to compromise and come up with a solution on our disagreement. Next, I'll go ahead and discuss a summary of the overall significant quantitative findings, which sought to compare the differences among assertive, passive, and aggressive listening statements across feelings such as anger and being ignored, and relational outcomes such as conflict resolution and relationship satisfaction. First, assertive probability and certainty were the most effective at reducing anger and feeling ignored, and the most effective at sharing, resolving conflict, and improving the relationship. Second, the advice giver and the evaluator elicited the most anger. The avoider elicited feelings of being ignored. Also, the avoider, advice giver, and the evaluator led to reduced sharing, least likely of resolving a conflict, and least likely to improve the relationship than other listening responses. The rescuer statement, however, was more of an in-between cross variables. In some, listening statements will yield different feelings and relational outcomes during a conflict.
About the research findings, you can see why these results have the potential to transform the understanding and teaching of listening within conflict. My name is Dr. Amy Anderson, and I've taught conflict resolution techniques in my college and university communication classes for 15 years. I've often discussed the benefits of active listening in maintaining effective communication during conflict, but I've never introduced the concept of assertive listening. Now that empirical evidence supports the use of assertive listening responses to improve relational outcomes in conflict, I can adapt my teaching to include this revolutionary approach in my curriculum. Let's walk through a practical classroom application. In class, I can give my students a case study with which are working together on a group project that counts toward your final grade. However, your partner feels upset that you are not doing your part of the project to their standards, and they express their anger to you. Then I could give students passive, aggressive, and assertive listening response statements with accompanying nonverbal communication cues for each style. In small groups, students could discuss how each response might impact the conflict, and they could choose the most appropriate listening response statement for the situation. Since this scenario mirrors the collaborative work that they might experience in various classes, students should be able to relate to this situation and utilize critical thinking to identify the most suitable listening response. Afterward, I could introduce the research and show how each of the various listening response options might impact the resolution of the conflict. As a teacher, I strive to give my students useful class activities that help them build skills they can implement immediately in their daily lives. Since conflict is inevitable, these lessons can have an immediate positive impact on their interpersonal relationships.
In conclusion, the results of our study show effective and ineffective ways to resolve conflict with anger. Based on a thorough review, we had 5 people looking for articles that were similar. So based on our thorough review of the literature, this is the first study to identify categories that are easy to understand and identify, and define passive, like the avoider, aggressive, like the advice giver, and the evaluator, and assertive. It is also the first study to identify the sentence structure of many categories, like the advice giver usually starts with the word you need to listen to me, and the evaluator with the word starting with why or how. Why do you always put me down? The assertive with an I, you, me statement with a verb of probability or certainty. My thought is you're feeling upset with me, and I need to check it out with you. This is also the first study to measure both quantitative and qualitative results. This was a very rare study because it brought together practitioners and researchers to collaborate with each other to find out which type of listening responses works and does not work. Even though we didn't talk much about the quantitative part of our study, the results clearly indicated that passive listening responses, statements, such as the avoider, increases anger, makes somebody feel ignored, makes somebody resistant to share their emotions, makes somebody resistant to resolving conflict, and makes the relationship less satisfactory. We also found that aggressive, like the advice giver and the evaluator, makes anger stronger, makes somebody feel ignored, makes somebody resistant to share their feelings, more resistant to resolve conflict, and makes the relationship less satisfactory. We also saw clearly, and everything was statistically significant, most at the 0.001 level. Assertive reduced the anger, made somebody feel listened to, made somebody want to share their feelings, motivated somebody to resolve the conflict, and made the relationship better. We strongly agree that this is a groundbreaking study to educate people on how and what to do to resolve conflict with feelings such as anger. It's a pioneering project because we pull together interpersonal communication expertise and experience of practitioners and academics. This information is practical for society and is supported by scientific studies. This is a pioneering project because it offers practical and proven relationship communication skills, and because of what led us to that, there are, of course, limitations that need to be addressed. Our study subjects who interpreted these listening response statements were given these statements in the same order. In retrospect, we should have randomized them to make sure our findings weren't complicated by what is called the order effect, the tendency some people have, at least sometimes, to choose an option either because it's first or last. Of course, our subjects were mostly college students. They were also from all over the United States, from California to Texas to New York State, coast to coast and north to south. Another limitation, it was done in the United States. It could be different in different countries. As we are already working on new studies on assertive listening and assertive sharing emotional statements, so hopefully we'll be back at the Global Listening Festival next year with another trailblazing of a study for you. We would really appreciate your assessment of our study. Our group would like to pose a question. The next time you get into a conflict situation with anger, which would be your choice? Passive-aggressive or assertive listening? To contact us, send an email to Dr. Steven Weiner at sjwreach@yahoo.com.